Hey friends, welcome back to another bonus episode of Theology in the Raw. This is a bonus Q&A episode where some of my Patreon supporters send in a bunch of questions, then they all vote on which questions they want me to address, and then I take the top 10 or 12 questions and work through them. And this will be a sneak peek at the first part of that bonus Q&A episode. If you want access to the full Q&A episode, you can go to patreon.com/theology and raw, become a Patreon supporter for as little as $5 a month. $10 a month gives you access to actually ask the questions that I address on these Q&A podcasts. Some of the questions I'll wrestle with are my thoughts on Rosaria Butterfield's critique of my view of using trans people's chosen pronouns. What are my thoughts on James Dobson and focus on the family's approach to LGBTQ related questions? What's my biggest takeaway from my interview with Sheila and Rebecca, Sheila Gregoire and Rebecca Lindbach? What are my thoughts on there being no male pronouns for elder qualifications in the Greek in 1 Timothy 3 and Titus 1? Is church membership biblical? Should we encourage affirming kids to attend affirming churches when they leave the house? Does Paul's own singleness disqualify him from being an elder according to 1 Timothy 3:2 and Titus 1:6, and on it goes. We'll get to these and more throughout this entire episode. So let's jump in. What are my thoughts on Rosaria Butterfield's recent post? And it's titled, wait for it, Why I No Longer Use Transgender Pronouns and Why You Shouldn't Either. This is on the Reformation 21 blog. I don't know, is this Rosaria's blog post or is this I don't know what this is. I don't know a lot of blogs. I don't read a lot of blogs in general. So yeah, it's on the Reformation 21 blog site. And I didn't read this article until somebody sent it to me. And so yeah, I don't want to read the whole thing. Let me start here. First of all, I have mad respect for Rosaria Butterfield. If you're not familiar with Rosaria, I came across her work years ago when she wrote a book called Secret Thoughts of an Unlikely Convert. Rosaria was a professor at an elite university. To use her language, she was a lesbian, very, very liberal, and she had this kind of, an unlikely conversion to Jesus Christ. And now she is a writer, speaker, super, super thoughtful. I mean, that book is incredible. Secret Thoughts of an Unlikely Convert, if you've not read it. She also wrote another book called The Gospel Comes with a House Key. I have not read this book, but everyone that I respect that has read it just says it's incredible. It's an amazing book. So Rosaria is a testimony to the grace of God, that the grace of God can reach anybody. Super sharp, super awesome. I haven't followed her work over the last few years. Okay. So So you may say she may still be killing it. Some of you may say she's gone off the rails. I honestly don't know. I hear stuff through grapevine, but I don't trust grapevine news. If I'm not interacting with somebody's work directly, then I basically don't have an opinion on stuff I haven't read firsthand. So I don't, that's where I'm coming from, a place of respect for Rosaria, even if we have some disagreements. So in this blog post, and I don't want to read the whole thing, but as the title suggests, she used to use trans people's chosen or preferred pronouns. Now she no longer does. Not only does she not use them, I mean, she says it's categorically sinful to use what she calls transgendered pronouns. And I don't want to criticize every little thing here in this article, because when it comes to questions around LGBTQ related questions, transgender questions about transgender identities and experiences, I mean, I can nitpick a lot of stuff, and that can get just really exhausting. I do find the phrase transgendered pronouns kind of odd, but I'll leave that aside. But Rosaria says using transgendered pronouns is a sin against the 9th commandment and encourages people to sin against the 10th commandment. Using transgendered pronouns is a sin against the creation ordinance. Using transgender pronouns is a sin against image bearing. It's a sin it discourages a believer's progressive sanctification, falsifies the gospel, cheapens redemption, tramples on the blood of Christ, fails to love my neighbor as myself, fails to offer genuine Christian hospitality, and on she goes. I already think even if I agreed with Rosaria that we shouldn't use someone's pronouns that don't match their biological sex, is maybe a better way of framing it. even if I agreed with that, I think her language. I personally think her language here is too strong. I wouldn't say using someone's pronouns cheapens redemption and tramples on the blood of Christ. To me, I don't. I think that's not just. I don't want to say too strong language. Like we need to use weak language. I just think it's theologically not very sophisticated on a theological level to use that kind of critique against these pronouns. That would be my opinion so far. And the reason why I got sent this article is because she names both me and Mark Yarhouse as disagreeing with her on this. She says psychologist Mark Yarhouse and author Preston Sprinkle summarize the Christian case for transgender pronouns. They believe using transgender pronouns is respectful of someone's chosen identity. It's kind and courteous and necessary for continuing a relationship with a transgender person. And then she goes on to say, I once sinfully said all these things too, but this position makes no Christian sense. I'm just kind of skimming her article here. Yeah, it seems that that's her summary of my position, which I think that does not represent my position well at all. As if I just kind of say, hey, we should use someone's pronouns because it's kind and courteous and it's necessary for relationship. I went back and read my 12-page section on this in my book Embodied, pages 200 to 212. And I just, if I can be as objectively as I can, okay, so obviously I'm the author, I'm being, disagreed with here, criticized, I guess. So it could, it could be easy for me to kind of be defensive or no, you misunderstood me, whatever. I don't know. From my most objective standpoint, and you be the judge. You're not me. You're not her. You're a third party looking on. If you're familiar with my 12-page section, and then, I don't know, you make the call. Is this a good summary of that 12-page section that I think you should use pronouns because it's respectful of someone's chosen identity, it's kind and courteous, and necessary for continuing a relationship? I do agree with that, but that to reduce my position to that, I think is kind of, I won't say it tramples on the blood of Christ, but I think it does misrepresent. I'm just kind of joking around. I think it misrepresents some of the more sophisticated arguments I wrestled with both for using pronouns and not using pronouns in the 12-page section. In fact, I summarize Rosaria's position. I don't think I name her in the book, but I do name like John Piper. I think I named Denny Burke, the Nashville Statement. My friend Rob Smith, who has a very good critique of my position, and I'm very happy saying, hey, go read the critiques, read both sides. I think he's got a very thoughtful approach to not, well, he kind of takes, Rob takes more of a pronoun avoidance approach, but then still would, to the best of his ability, not use someone's chosen pronouns. And I even conclude that section saying, personally, I think these arguments raise good points. And then I go on to talk about the arguments for pronoun hospitality. So I do try to weigh both. I try to steel man both sides of this argument, and I tried to do so fairly so that the reader can make up their mind by looking at the actual arguments. And then on pages 206 to 212, I give my reasons for siding with the pronoun hospitality view. Pronoun hospitality meaning in most cases, okay, I think there's always exceptions to the rule. In most cases, I would do my best to use someone's chosen pronouns, but it's not. I mean, I went back and read this section, and I begin my defense of that view by even saying that I think we should be concerned with what I call like Orwellian attempts to use language to manipulate kind of reality. Like I'm very sympathetic to that. I even criticize legalizing using someone's pronouns, and I even cite, the kind of well-known Canada's Bill C-16, which put Jordan Peterson on the map. That using someone's pronouns should be an act of personal courtesy, not legal demand. So I thought that was a good point that people like Rosaria raise. So I think I'm very sensitive to that. I think language can be used to manipulate, control, force an ideology onto people. And I think all of that's very dangerous. My approach to this is both out of common courtesy, but my main argument, which I would love, especially as a linguist, to hear Rosaria wrestle with is, I closed my book. Do I need to go back? It assumes that there is this profound flexibility with language, even around gendered language. Like when the King James says, "He that hath ears to hear, let him hear," Matthew 11:15. This doesn't mean Jesus was letting everyone with ovaries off the hook. Yeah, and you could even say, well, yeah, we shouldn't say guys that way. We shouldn't say he who has ears. Okay, that's another discussion. I'm just saying that testifies to the natural flexibility of language that we often kind of assume in our society. And I even, look at how even different cultures will use the same English terms differently. Football in the United States is different than football in the United Kingdom. Then I go back and look at how, language has even shifted over, the English language has even shifted over time. I think I actually cite an example from Chaucer. I was kind of impressed with that, actually. I don't know how I dug that up, but I went back to some of the Old English, the word girl, Girle, apparently was often used to mean people of either sex in the Canterbury Tales. Anyway, so I give several examples where language is flexible, and that kind of sets up this common scenario where as Christians, we use language that reflects our worldview, and everybody else uses language to reflect their worldview. So I think pronouns should and do match your biological sex. Okay, so that's where I'm coming from. It's not, so I think he, she should reflect one's biological sex, but other people, especially today, for various reasons, would say, no, my pronouns match my gender identity. Okay, I can disagree with that. I can disagree with even the concept of gender identity. I can disagree with everything that other person is saying or believing, but in the world we live in, language is shared social space. So if you picture, you have person A over here, person B over here. I'm holding up two fingers kind of opposite each other. Person A has a worldview that says pronouns match biological sex, and that would be me. And I think that's true and good and the best view to have. If I can be honest, I think that's true. But person B says, no, my pronouns match my biological sex, and that reflects their worldview. Do I demand that their language, that they use language to match my worldview? I would say no, I don't expect that. And I would also assume they don't expect me to use language to resonate with their worldview. Now, so we're at a standstill. Either somebody has to kind of concede, meet someone where they're at to accommodate to somebody's worldview for the sake of entering into a relationship, having a conversation, or we can maintain, no, I will not use language that reflects your worldview because I don't agree with that. And if we go about life that way, this isn't the only issue where we're going to have a hard time, I think, relating to people. So I think I've been saying in the book, I'll say it here on air, that I think there are times, there might be times, there are times when we put our stake in the ground and we don't use language that concedes to somebody else's worldview. I could give some examples here, but that's just going to open up so many cans of worms, and you might not even be able to hear the rest of this podcast. So I'm going to refrain. But I'm going to say that there might be times when, if someone demands that I say something or believe, or especially believe something that I don't believe, I can't do that. This is one area where I would side with the view. And I might, everything I'm saying here, I might be like 80% sure of what I'm saying. Okay, this is something that is complex. I understand. I think there's good arguments on both sides. But I would lean toward the view that in this case, I want to accommodate to where the person is at, not because I believe their worldview, nor do I embrace the connection they're making between their language and their worldview, but I'm going to accommodate, meet someone where they're at so that I can enter into a relationship with that person and honor the person, even in the midst of disagreement, is how I would frame it. Okay, that's a short version of a really long and complex issue. And some of you may say, yeah, I totally disagree with that. It's totally fine. Like, I take a number. A lot of people disagree with what I said. I guess my only concern here is it feels like in this article, because the questioner was asking me what I thought about this article, was kind of reducing what I think is a much more complex question down to simply me, doing all these very sinful things. I mean, she has a list of I'm literally trampling on the blood of Christ for the sake of being kind and courteous is what my view is reduced to. And I think that doesn't represent some of the more deeper complexity of an already complex conversation. So if you want more on that, again, I have that 12-page section in my book, or if you want a free summary of the pronoun hospitality view, you can go to centerforfaith.com. Under resources, we have a pastoral paper titled A Case for Pronoun Hospitality, written by Dr. Greg Coles, a friend of mine, who kind of articulated and coined the term pronoun hospitality. Okay, next question. Okay, this one's going to be quick. My thoughts on Dr. James Dobson and Focus on the Family, specifically around LGBTQ issues in general. Again, going back to something I said in passing earlier, I don't like to give an opinion on something I haven't dug into firsthand. And I haven't dug into Focus on the Family's treatment of LGBTQ stuff very thoroughly firsthand. That's just not been on my desk of things to do. And I'm very well aware of the reputation that Focus on the Family has. Dr. James Dobson, who hasn't been there in years, I don't think. Here's the extent of my interaction with Focus on the Family is before my team and I started the Center for Faith, Sexuality, and Gender. I think this might have been in fall 2016 or spring 2017. We actually flew out to Denver to meet with, I think we were meeting with some just various people. And we also wanted to meet with Focus on the Family, hear their approach, talk to the people on the inside, get to know them, have them get to know us. Not for any like partnership or anything, but we just, hey, we're starting this organization and we want to kind of get to know other people, influential people in the field. We sat down with, I don't actually remember their names and I wouldn't probably say them on the air anyway, but some of the in-house people that at that time were experts in this area. And we had a wonderful conversation. I thought that they were thoughtful, kind, gracious. I would say that 2 or 3 individuals we talked to, in my opinion, were more gracious than the reputation of Focus on the Family as a whole sometimes comes off as. I hope I'm just speaking of the reputation. Like when I hear people talk about Focus on the Family and the circles I run, it's typically kind of like not always the best perspective. I was very impressed with their grace and kindness when I talked to them. I can see that there were going to be some differences. I think they would probably line up with everything or most of what Rosaria says, at least on the pronoun thing. I think even they would come down harder against Christians using the term gay as a word to describe their experience or part of their identity. Using LGBTQ language, I think they would probably be nervous about that. So there's going to be difference. We line up on the big picture stuff, on his Christian historic view of marriage, and so I think that's the main things I think we're aligned on. But I could see some maybe differences in pastoral approach, and I think I just want to leave it at that because I haven't really scoured through their documents, read stuff they've done, and so I want to reserve, again, opinion for stuff that I have actually interacted with. Okay, next question. What was your biggest takeaway from your interview with Sheila and Rebecca? I forgot when this episode dropped. It was maybe a couple weeks ago from the time this episode is released. You can go back. It's on modesty and purity culture with Sheila Gregoire and Rebecca Lindenbach. They have become 2 fan favorites among the Theology and Rock community. They were on last year and we had a hoot and holler of a time, and then they came back on this time to talk about their new book. Right here, it's on the top of my pile here. She Deserves Better: Raising Girls to Resist Toxic Teachings on Sex, Self, and Speaking Up. And I had a wonderful time dialoguing with Sheila and Rebecca on some really important things. So part of my motivation for this is, as many of you know, I have 3 teenage daughters. 2 are still in the house. One's engaged to be married, and we have these conversations all the time about modesty and messages left over from purity culture and stuff. Let me, I guess, back up and say I have never read a book that would be classified as a purity culture book. Which is weird. Like, I became a Christian, in 97, went to a conservative Christian college from 97 to 99 or 2000, went to a conservative Christian seminary, 2000 to 2003. So, this is like, I now know, I didn't know then, was like at the heart of the purity culture movement. But as I remember, the only thing I can remember that was my only exposure was hearing about Josh Harris's book, I Kiss Dating Goodbye. A lot of people at Master's College, now university, read the book. I never read it. I just remember like, oh, baby was kind of talking about that book. And that was it. I'm sure I must have heard messages, I guess, that were purity culture-esque, but I people recall these like, oh, the things that purity culture taught and this, and they told us this, they told us that, they use this illustration, I dodged it. I don't know. Maybe I was way too into like systematic theology and Pauline theology at that time to kind of care about that stuff. But all that to say, even though I kind of like whistled through the belly of the purity culture beast without even really absorbing at least any of the cultural messages. So I feel like I learned more about purity culture in the last 5 to 7 years, talking to people who were inundated with the messages from purity culture and hearing things. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's horrible. Did they really say that? Really? You're a damaged goods and you're like a flower that's been deflowered or whatever, flowered because you went too far with your boyfriend or something. And then the subtle messages are not so subtle that put blame on women for things they experienced, from abuse to rape. And I'm like, oh my God. I'm like, that can't be true. Did they really say like, so I'm more coming at it, looking back on the purity culture, kind of shocked at some of the messages that were sent is how I come into these conversations today. So it's a little bit of a selfish reason for me wanting Sheila and Rebecca on the show, but it was really because me and my daughters keep having ongoing conversations about this stuff. Like great conversation, like so good. I'm learning a ton from my daughters. And I'm like, hey, I know these 2 authors who came out with a book that is addressing this very thing. So I'm like, I want to have them on the show so they can help me basically be a better dad to my daughters in a way that's healthy and doesn't, I would say, unintentionally imitate some of the stuff that has come out of purity culture. So yeah, I love the interview. I thought I learned a ton. My biggest takeaway, there's too many to mention. I would say 2 that come to mind are, number 1, the unintended shame we create in how we, meaning let's just say Christian leaders, parents, talk about modesty. The way we go about modesty conversations, modesty talks, I think I've seen, and this comes from talking to my daughters and hearing from people like Sheila and Rebecca and many other people in my life who kind of have told me about some of the messaging that has come from purity culture. Yeah, I've had several people in the podcast that have gone into this, but so that would be probably my number 1 takeaway is, and again, I'm going to say unintended shame. Obviously, there's very explicit intended ways in which Christians can shame girls. Those to me are blatantly obvious and wrong and terrible and evil and wicked and need to be buried. But there's some I think that are well intended, that are that send unintended messages that absolutely produce shame, especially in teen girls in particular. And I am so utterly thankful for Sheila and Rebecca for driving that home and showing examples of how that can happen. And also, I guess this is related, but another takeaway is how we can unintentionally make girls and women feel at fault or even partially at fault for any hint of abuse they experience. And I'm using abuse very generally here. There's man, yeah, there's been obviously a ton of just unchecked misogyny, abuse, all the way from like, the SBC stuff going on, the Catholic Church stuff going on, kind of the real blatant, explicit sexual assault and rape that hasn't been dealt with and has been covered up and mishandled. And I mean, obviously that's a huge, huge issue. Also, I would say some of the unintended or more subtle messaging that dehumanizes women. And this is, again, something that both my wife, my daughters, and their friends, we have, teenage girls in our house all the time. Right? My daughters are bringing friends over. So we're having these ongoing conversations. And so I'm constantly learning about how the church, again, I'll say, obviously needs to deal with all the explicit stuff, and that could take a lifetime to unravel, but also a lot of the unexplicit, unintentional, subtle messaging that happens. It's just simply in the air of the church that needs to be addressed. So all that to say, I love my dialogue with Sheila and Rebecca. I will, let me just give a little addendum to that. So as some of you know, if you're on social media, you know that, I mean, I think pretty much every single episode on Theology and Raw, it gets I would say overwhelming positive response from what I could tell, and always some negative response. The negative responses could range from, I didn't like the guest, I didn't like you, I didn't like anything, or they'll like say, you said this and that's terrible. I'm like, did I say that? Like, where did I say that? I'll go back and listen. I'm like, I didn't say that. Like, I don't know how you got that. So I get I would say that the negative critique happens after every single episode. And, I talk about this at the beginning of every year when I kind of set the kind of vision for what Theology and Raw is. The nature of the kinds of conversations we have in the show, the way in which I like to go about raw, honest conversations, the way I like to, sometimes I like to test an idea by pushing back or trying to see things from different angles. And I tried to do that with my conversation with Sheila and Rebecca. And I thought that was good. And they seemed, right when we ended, they were like so thankful, like, thank you so much for pushing back. I'm like, it wasn't, I'm not pushing back because I disagree with probably much of anything you're saying, but I just like to test an idea. I'm like, what about this? What about that? What if somebody says this? And in that scenario, what about, and I think, okay. So after that episode, I got a really good range of positive responses. I got the typical kind of negative stuff. There was people that said I couldn't finish the episode. I couldn't stand listening to Sheila and Rebecca. There were other people that said I couldn't finish the episode because I couldn't stand listening to you. Like, I got all the normal stuff, critique of the guests, critique of me, critique of the topic, whatever. And some of it was like, this is what you said and I disagree. And I'm like, yeah, that's what I said. I'm sorry you disagree. Other things were like, this is what you said and I disagree. I'm like, I didn't say that. I don't even believe that. Never even thought that idea that you said I have. So in the wake of this one, I got the typical, friends shooting me stuff. Hey, did you see this? Did you see that? And I typically, I guess I'm just, call me a curmudgeon, but I'm just not really impressed with how like social media goes about critiquing stuff. So I typically just don't pay attention to it. And when I do, I look at stuff and I'm like, yeah, that's why I don't look at stuff on social media. Like I have enough. I live outside of my echo chamber enough that I'm constantly engaging in good faith, honest, curious, steel man critiquing. Where people are saying, here's my best reading of what you said, and here's why I disagree. I'm like, dude, that's awesome. I want to grow and do better next time. So I have enough of that in my life that I don't need to like. Scour social media or Google my name to see all the stuff that people are saying about me. Then for some reason, this one, I had enough people send me stuff that I'm like, all right, I'm going to go check out and see I'm going to peek behind the curtain of social media, see what's going on. And I'm like, oh yeah, it's kind of, I don't know, seem kind of like the typical stuff. And the reason why I don't spend more than, 10 minutes on social media a week, but Yeah. So I do, but I wonder, I think there might've been a I don't know if this was like the normal range of critiques that I get, or if it was more than normal or less than normal. It's hard to judge these things, but there did seem to be an unusually high number of people that, in my opinion, you make your own decision, were not representing the podcast well, or what I was saying really at all. In fact, I had one friend locally here, a woman who deals a lot with, like, I mean, I don't want to get into the details, but like is really very steeped in like situations where women are abused and threatened. And, she's very up to speed on this kind of stuff. And she sent, I think, my wife an article written about me and says, "Hey, I really want to talk to you guys." And I'm like, "Oh no, here we go." Like, and my wife says, "Well, okay, did you actually listen to the podcast?" And she's like, "No, I haven't," and my wife was like, "Well, go, Hey friends, I hope you enjoyed this portion of the Patreon only Q&A podcast. If you would like to listen to the full length episode and receive other bonus content like monthly podcasts, opportunities to ask questions, access to first drafts of my research, and monthly Zoom chats and more, then please head over to patreon.com/theology in the raw to join Theology in the Raw's Patreon community. That's patreon.com/theology in the raw.
This show is part of the Converge Podcast Network.